So, this is going to be a unique one. Today we're going to talk about the idea of a Joestar switching parts with her Jobros. So, today we're going to talk about what would happen if Josuke, Okuyasu, and Koichi replaced Jotaro, Kakyoin, and Polnareff. And to make it even more interesting, let's talk about the opposite. Let's talk about what Jotaro, Kakyoin, and Polnareff would have done in Morio in that place. And let's see what would happen if Josuke, Okuyasu, and Koichi took Jotaro, Kakyoin, and Polnareff's place in going to Egypt and fighting Dio and all that stuff. Man, I'm getting tongue twisted in every single left, right, and center at this point. So I'll just start off to the video because I don't want to keep saying it because it's twisting my tongue and I have a feeling I'm gonna botch it. So let's just start the video. So the first part to change would be Stardust Crusaders, which would start off similar to how Diamond is Unbreakable originally started. So Joseph and Abdul would be going to Morio to get Joseph's illegitimate son Josuke. And along the way they bump into Koichi. So, like that. I feel like the story would kind of start out the same way the original Part 4 does. And the only change that there might be no Angelo fight, and if there is, it'd just be Abdul, Josuke, and Joseph going against Angelo. And then after that, we would then get to Josuke and Koichi meeting Okuyasu and Keicho, where that all goes the same, but the only change is that instead, Keicho gets killed by Hanged Man. So that would then lead to Okuyasu joining the Crusaders for this timeline. So no Kakyoin here, and also no Polnareff here either. So I guess we go to the trip and we start off, and off the bats without Kakyoin, it's hard to see how Tower of Grey goes. I do believe Josuke could set up a trap, or maybe Koichi or Okuyasu could use their stand to do it. Like Okuyasu, like maybe a trap that can be set up, like Koichi uses echoes to try to wrestle it into the hand, which I think Koichi would probably wake in Act 1 in this fight, which Okuyasu and Koichi would team up with Josuke to all kill Tower of Grey, which I could actually see replacing instead. And the plane still crashes. And when they do go to the Chinese restaurant, they never meet Polnareff because he's not born in this scenario yet. I mean, he is born, but he's a lot younger, so he's not going to be here. And the next real change to come out of it would probably be the next fight, which was the fight in the sea. Like the one with the captain dude with Dark Blue Moon, which would be Josuke instead. Which I don't know how Josuke's getting out without Starfinger. We could go with Crazy Finger. I mean, that'd be too dumb. I'd assume instead to replace it, Josuke could do the projectile thing where maybe he has a rock and then shoots it out of his thumb instead to get the win. And then the orangutan fight would just go the same, but Josuke just does the same thing there. Personally, I do feel like Josuke and Crazy Diamond can just replace Jotaro and Star Platinum when it comes to that fight. Next change would be Hangman and Jake would be the little doll fight, Devo, which would have Okuyasu replace him. Now, Okuyasu is a lot dumber than Polnareff, so he probably doesn't figure out that someone's hiding in the room as quick. So, yeah, there's that. And plus, Polnareff was still kind of an idiot. I do feel like Okuyasu might just get killed there if that's the case. But assuming Okuyasu is able to figure out by some miracle, what could change? Well, I assume Okuyasu could defeat Devo, but I do feel like he could win the same way, possibly, like how Polnareff did, as Polnareff kind of got lucky in that fight ending, like with the mirror thing, so hard to say. I feel like Okuyasu might win this one. Now, the next real fight to change would be the Yellow Temperance fight, which would focus on Josuke instead, and Koichi would also be with Josuke. So I guess when it comes down to that, Josuke against Yellow Temperance seems like a fun fight, like Crazy Diamond's warping ability, but I feel like the fight would end with Josuke getting a hair insult and beating the crap out of the guy. So, yeah. And by the way, I'm going to talk about all the fights here because Jotaro and Polnareff and Kakyoin were basically in most of Stardust Crusaders fights. So, the next fight, Whole Horse and J Guile, I believe. Yeah, I think it was. How does Whole Horse and Jagal change? Well, I do feel like the whole thing with Polnareff, like how Polnareff and Abdul argued, I do believe Okuyasu could do that instead and meet Whole Horse, and all that can happen with the hand and Okuyasu instead. And Abdul probably still does die. Now, as for who does the saving Okuyasu instead, I think it'd be Josuke. Koichi's too incompetent to do that kind of fight, so I think it'd fit better to have Josuke do it. Though it could work for Koichi to do it, and could maybe be Echo's Act 2's evolution. Personally, I feel like Echo's Act 2 would evolve during the Death 13 fight. So, yeah. Now, as for this fight between Okuyasu and Hangman alongside Josuke, now this is a hard one, and I do believe Josuke could maybe get a finishing blow, same with Okuyasu. Now, I think they may be able to hit Hangman. The only thing is that Okuyasu is slower than Josuke. Josuke has a speed of 300 kilometers per hour, and Hangman's considered to be faster than as fast as light, so they might die here. But I do believe they could actually land a good hit. Like, I feel like Josuke might position himself in the right way and punch down Hangman, and then Okuyasu just swipes him away after that. Now, as for the next fights, like, the next fight that would probably really change... God, I haven't seen Stardust Crusaders in a while. ZZ Top, the car fight, I think was next. Because I do feel like Josuke might just do the same thing Jotaro did. Another real change is that maybe some other real fights is like the Enya fight that could change. Instead, maybe Josuke actually, like, I could see Crazy Diamond being able to do the same thing Star Platinum does, and that's absorb Justice with its breath alone. Because Crazy Diamond does have a crazy amount of strength, no pun intended, so it could do that. Steely Dan's another interesting fight, and I feel like that would just end with Josuke always getting his hair insulted by Steely Dan the whole time, and that just leading Josuke to bottle up all that rage and try not to lose it. Once we do get to the ending, though, that's when he does let it all out and probably delivers a far more brutal beatdown to Steely Dan than Jotaro. Maybe even killing him, but then again, I doubt Josuke would kill him, so yeah. Some other changes, like the sun fight, could probably go the same. I could just see Josuke, Okuyasu, and Koichi doing the insane laugh. Some other real fights... Death 13 could be where Echo's Act 2 comes out. Debatable. Maybe Act 3 and Act 2 can come on a different fight. Like, that's kind of hard. Because Koichi probably still gets echoes. But it would be hard to position in what fight. And some, like, other fights that could probably change. Like, Okuyasu probably takes the spot in the genie battle in Polnareff's place. And would meet all the genies and all that. And would probably meet an evil version of Abdul and Keicho. And yeah, that'd probably be everything there. The Know-It-All fight's another change, and Koichi probably does get scratched in the eyes. But since Josuke's here, he probably heals him. And Josuke versus Know-It-All would probably just be the same thing as Jotaro versus Know-It-All. And I could see Josuke using Crazy Diamond in very creative settings in this fight. Like, maybe using sand and, like, all that. But yeah. And Koichi would not miss out the story like how Kakyoin did, because Koichi gets his eyes healed after the fight. Now, some other real changes to come out of this. The Anubis fight would change, because now Josuke and Okuyasu and Koichi are factors in it. I assume Okuyasu would be the one who gets possessed, and Josuke has to fight him, with Koichi kind of cheering him on in the sidelines. Josuke could probably stop Anubis the same way Jotaro did. Personally, a lot of the fights Jotaro resolved mostly around strength and rarely used his brain. I feel like Josuke was very opposite of that, and plus everything Star Platinum had to do to like punch himself out of a situation, Josuke and Crazy Diamond would have just done the same thing. God, it's been a long time since I've seen 3. The Lessie fight also could have Josuke and Okuyasu and Koichi be shrunk down as kids. Josuke can beat the crap out of him as a kid, maybe. We need to fight for Echo's Act 3 to evolve in. I mean, you can give one of the fights away to Koichi so he can get Echo's Act 3. Personally, that's probably what I would have done. As for the fights, uh, with all the fights, uh, maybe Vanilla Ice if you want to go the route of having Koichi take the spot of Okuyasu and Polnareff for that place. Uh, the next fights would be like Older Derby, which is where you meet your first big flaw. Because without Josuke, if I remember correctly, sucks at gambling because of that one episode. So, in other words, he's good as dead. Same with the others. But I do feel like by some way, maybe Koichi can be the one to defeat him, which is probably what I would do, and maybe that could be Echo's Act 3's evolution. Uh, I guess overall, a lot of the fights wouldn't really change, except for some fights, like with ability wise. And then the next real change would be like the final two fights. Vanilla Ice, I'd probably have Koichi be the one there with. I'd probably have Koichi and Okuyasu both there, and this could be like Koichi's Echoes Act 3 evolution and Okuyasu's character growth conclusion. Like Josuke and Joseph can be there, and maybe another character could be with them. Like, I don't know, maybe for the sake of the story, Whole Horse joins the Crusaders, or one of their allies join because because Josuke just heals them or something. I don't know, and then that can just be the fight. So, or maybe Joseph is the one who games first, and then Josuke later. But since Josuke is a master gamer, he may just figure it out without having a test dummy for that younger Darby fight. So yeah. Koichi and Okuyasu doing the Vanilla Ice fight's interesting. And Avdol probably still dies, and Iggy still dies, but Koichi and Okuyasu can get to a point where Koichi awakens Echoes Act 3, while Okuyasu uses the hand to kill him. And after that, we can kind of see them meet Dio, and I guess that leads to the split off, and who would go with who? Now, in my opinion, I think Koichi would go with Joseph, and Josuke and Okuyasu would go together. Koichi would probably be the one to die to Dio, and the one who reveals Dio's ability and dies in the process, similar to how Kakyoin did in the original. So Koichi, unfortunately, is dying in the place of Kakyoin, and would use He'd use Act 3 to freeze Dio down. Dio would need to stop time and kill him, and just donut him, and then after that, Koichi gets sent to the water tower, uses Echo's Act 1, probably hits something, and then when Joseph touches it, he can hear it says time stop or stop time or something that reveals the world's power. That's how I'd imagine it. Now, as for the final bit, Josuke versus Dio. Oh boy, this is hard. Like Dio versus for the first fight, like Josuke cannot move in time stop, so it'd be impossible for him to get any hits, let alone offense in there. But is it possible for Josuke to beat Dio? Well, Dio's got to be very stupid with his stand. Like, Dio's not stupid with his stand. Like, he's better than Okuyasu at his stand, I'll give him that, but he could be a lot deadlier. And I do feel like if Dio does get the chance, he might kill Josuke in time stop. Okuyasu could probably save Josuke. Like, I think the best bet would have to be a 2v1 type thing. As for how Josuke and Okuyasu together could work, Okuyasu would probably get taken out in the middle of the fight, to be honest. And I guess high Dio versus Josuke is even more unfair. But Josuke can maybe find ways to counter it. Unless you go the route of giving Crazy Diamond time stop, which probably wouldn't happen. Josuke, in other words, cannot beat Dio and might die. But if we give Josuke the win, how can we? Well, maybe Josuke is able to escape the road roller somehow, and because of that, he's able to sneak behind Dio and donut him. Then that leads Dio and Josuke to get that big final clash at the end where Dio explodes. So that's kind of how it would end. Josuke, Okuyasu, and Joseph would all survive the part, and they'd look up at the skies to see the ghost of Avdol, Iggy, and Koichi. And that would be the end of part 3. Now let's talk about part 4. So this is interesting as well. And how would the introductions go? Well, Josuke's probably still living in Morio, but maybe during the events of Morio, maybe Jotaro had moved with his mom Holly after finding out about the illegitimate son of Joseph who actually saved the day. Uh, this could be very unique and would more than likely lead to, well, a lot of things like how would they react to him, etc. And how would Jotaro react to his uncle? And I think Jotaro would probably still be the same. And I do maybe think that part 4 could start the same with Jotaro being in a prison cell. That's how you introduce your slice of life protagonist, folks, okay? As for characters like Kakyoin and Polnareff's introduction, I think Kakyoin's introduction would be very interesting because he's not a villain anymore. And as for Polnareff's introduction, I'd probably have it be something like Polnareff looking for the guy who killed his sister, who is in this case probably Kira or Kira. And I'd probably say Kira because Kira likes to kill girls. So how would the fights change? Well, Aqua Necklace with a role switch. I mean, assuming Aqua Necklace takes place in this part instead of the first beginning of 3. Uh, this is a very unique fight. So putting Aqua Necklace against a younger Jotaro and a more experienced Josuke. Well, in the original fight, Jotaro did nothing and Josuke mostly carried the fight. I feel like the roles would have to be switched, or Josuke would just beat Aqua Necklace a lot faster. Next would probably be like Polnareff's introduction, and Polnareff would probably be introduced somewhat as a threat, challenging Kakyoin and Jotaro to a duel, and they both defeat him. The next real big arc to change would probably be like the Lock dude, and it'd probably just be Kakyoin fighting him, and Kakyoin probably can defeat that guy, let's be honest. And it's the same thing for the Puppet Kid. Yukiko is another interesting arc, and I feel like it'd probably just be Kakyoin and Yukiko instead. And I think Hierophant Green could probably defeat Yukiko in some way. I feel like Kakyoin is a crafty enough stand user who could actually defeat Yukiko. And some other real fights, like the Tonio stuff, would just be Jotaro and Polnareff instead. And Akira's probably the next real change in that. How would the 3 Crusaders plus a more experienced older Josuke do in this fight? Well, I think they would probably do better. Like part 3 Jotaro, part 3 Polnareff, and Kakyoin were very powerful stand users and were very experienced for their age. A more experienced Josuke would be very powerful to the team, and they'd probably be able to defeat Chili Pepper and Akira a lot faster. The rat fight's another fight that would probably be a lot quicker. And to be fair, Kira may actually get caught faster. Like, I'd have probably Kakyoin and Josuke go together in the sheer heart attack fight instead. Having those two together would be unique. And how would they change the arc? Well, let's kind of see how. So Kakyoin would be a lot more wise. He's not as emotional as Koichi, so he's a lot more safe against this stand. He's a lot more analytical, and probably more analytical than an older Josuke, debatably. And the two of them would probably defeat Stardust Attack a lot faster, but Josuke would probably still get hurt. Kakyoin would find a way to defeat it with his Hierophant ability that can enter inside of it, and that would just lead to Kakyoin versus Kira. Now, how would a Kakyoin versus Kira fight go? Probably Kakyoin wins due to range-wise, but I do think Kira is going to find a way to defeat Kakyoin. The fight would definitely not be as big of a squash as the Koichi one, as Kira would probably find a way to counter Kakyoin by using Killer Queen's explosions to scare Kakyoin off and then donut him. Kakyoin probably doesn't seem like the kind of dude who would wear a sock inside out, and doesn't seem likely his shoe would fall off out of coincidence. But assuming it does, maybe Kakyoin does maybe he wears a sock inside out, which is very out of character probably. An injured, almost dead, older Josuke versus Kira. I feel like Kira would win in this scenario, And plus, Josuke might actually die because Jotaro nor Polnareff have healing abilities. So that technically means he might actually die from blood loss, or they've probably taken the Speedwagon Foundation and they patch his wounds up. Jotaro and Polnareff would stop Kira and would make sure he does not get away with it. And I think Kira would probably escape like in the original. Now, some of the arcs would also change, like the fights that would focus on Josuke, Okuyasu, and Koichi now focus on Jotaro, Kakyoin, and Polnareff, which is very interesting, so yeah. And I guess the final fights, how would that change, like with Kira? And I think it'd probably be Polnareff and Jotaro together with Kakyoin and Josuke. And since Jotaro doesn't have healing powers, this means Polnareff unfortunately is gonna die in this arc. So yeah, I mean it could be Kakyoin as well, but I feel like it's more unlikely Polnareff is gonna be with Jotaro because Polnareff's more like Okuyasu. And if Polnareff does die, that's gonna be very interesting to say the least. And I do feel like Jotaro could defeat Polnareff while he's still injured. I mean, I do feel like Jotaro and Kira's final bit could be like how Josuke and Kira's was. And Jotaro might actually die, but I do feel like Jotaro would be able to defeat the bubble in time. And may just awaken Time Stop and beat Kira with it. And I feel like Jotaro would take the plant after that, and after that would just use Star Platinum, stop time, and beat Kira and kill him. And that's probably how it'd go, with Josuke and Kakyoin also being there. And this would be very interesting, because now we actually do watch a Jobro die in Part 4, which would end up being Polnareff, who's replacing Okuyasu. So, rest in peace to Polnareff, who actually dies in this timeline. So, the next part to talk about is 5. Now, how does 5 change? Well, since the original Jotaro only sent Koichi out because the Joestars would be able to track each other, it seems likely Josuke would need to send a non-Joestar out, which would probably be Kakyoin. Now, Kakyoin being the one sent to Italy is a very unique case scenario. Like, how would he do against Giorno and all that? In my opinion, he'd probably just use the Emerald Splash and prevent Giorno from escaping. I do feel like the story can just go the same, but Kakyoin's Hierophant Green replacing Echoes in the situations. And I do feel like, unlike Koichi, Kakyoin would stay. As for the fights, if Kakyoin stays, a little like Kakyoin, but he's like a little bit older with a little more experience, would be a lot better off in Italy than Koichi would have. And he probably would have been able to help a lot of the fights. Not carry per se, but like actually help and like defeat the opponents. And as for like fight wise, I don't know what fights he could appear in. He'd probably be like in 1 or 2 fights, like maybe White Album or like I don't know, maybe him and like he could maybe replace Mista for the Pesky and Prosciutto fight. Or maybe can go with Narancia for the Tiny Feet fight or something, or maybe he's involved in the Green Day and Oasis fight or something. I could also probably see Fugo staying for the sake of the plot, so Kakyoin has someone to switch with during the body swap thing. Oh yeah, speaking of body swap, let's talk about Okuyasu, who is in Italy in this place. Because Polnareff is ending up replacing Okuyasu, it only makes sense. As for how this would go, well, putting Okuyasu in the place, like having him be the one going to Italy in the early 90s, it seems in character he'd screw up like how Polnareff did. Like, Okuyasu was a pretty big idiot. And it seems likely that he would be a big enough dingus to catch himself into Diavolo's trap like how Polnareff did. And he's a lot dumber, so it's more unlikely he'd get a lot more hurt in the process. Now, I feel like he would probably just lose his legs and arm. It may actually lose more limbs out of the process, debatably. He could probably have more scars on him, more cuts, because he's a lot more reckless, so he'd probably learn to stop being reckless. So a smarter Okuyasu in Italy would mean that he might actually kill Diavolo. And plus with Requiem, he might actually be able to stop Diavolo. Now, I do feel like Diavolo would probably be able to win the fight still, because Diavolo is just that good. And would probably just erase time and just donuts Okuyasu before he could use Requiem on himself. Okuyasu would probably still get the hand Requiem, and that'd probably just lead to a Silver Chariot Requiem thing. And I feel like either Kakyoin or Fugo is gonna die in this arc. It depends on who you feel like should die. My personal bias makes me want Kakyoin to live, so I'd probably have Fugo die. But if you want, Fugo could live and Kakyoin could die, or both live or both die. I feel like either way, one of them's gonna die. And heck, if you want, like, if Fugo still does lead the team for the sake of the story, maybe Risotto survives, and maybe he could switch with Kakyoin. I don't know. I would assume for the sake of the story, you need an extra member so Kakyoin could switch bodies with, because he's probably gonna stay on like Koichi. So yeah, Kakyoin probably does die against Diavolo, or he might live, but he'd probably stop returning after this point. And at that point, Jotaro is honestly also done with the story. So yeah, Jotaro goes from being the face of the franchise to just only being a one and only part character. That's a sad fall from grace for him. And Okuyasu becomes a turtle in this timeline because of it. So hooray for Okuyasu, I guess. Now let's talk about the final part. Part 6, Stone Ocean. Now at this point, I feel like it's more unlikely that Jolene's just going to be the daughter of Josuke for this part, which is an interesting concept. So let's see what would go. So Josuke's going to be in Dio's place, where he can never really spend time with his daughter. He ends up having a daughter in Florida. He can never spend time with her because of Dio's minions and all that, and they want revenge. So Josuke's got to go in alone and just try to stop them. Now, as for some stuff to happen out of it, Josuke being in more, like in Florida, like him going in the place of Jotaro, like I feel like the Goo Goo Dolls would just go, like that whole thing with Quest goes the same. And then after that, we can just do Josuke and Jolene versus the John Gallier fight. Now, I think Josuke would do a lot better and a lot worse at the same time. So putting Josuke in that fight would be interesting. He probably has to get stuck and lose his disc. I feel like he would probably have read the memories and he would all that stuff goes the same. Now, as for Jolene, I felt like her story would go the same for the rest of this whole thing. So Jolene in part 6 does go the same, and Josuke is the one who gets put into a coma in the place of Jotaro. Now, as for the final fight of 6, Josuke would make his return by probably saving Jolene some way. Like maybe he does the bullet technique and deflects Pucci's bullets. This leaves Pucci and Jolene both shocked, and then when Pucci turns around, Crazy Diamond just punches him in the face. And as for Josuke going against Pucci there, Josuke probably just fires some like more bullets to try to stop Pucci and probably throw the harpoon like how Jotaro did. And that all goes the same and made it happen. Now, can Josuke beat Made in Heaven with the team? Now, I've technically did my idea on Josuke vs. Made in Heaven, so I'll sum it up to this. No, Josuke's not going to be able to defeat Made in Heaven. I do feel like under the right circumstances, maybe Josuke can land a good enough hit, but it's not. But I do feel like the part's going to end the same. I do feel like in some way Pucci's going to have Josuke get trapped in between the world or Jolene, who would be his daughter in this timeline. And Josuke does seem like the kind of dude who would not let his own child die. He's a lot more kind-hearted than Jotaro was, who did let his own child live, so I do feel like Josuke would have done the same thing. And Josuke would more than likely die, so the part ultimately does go the same, I guess. And that would just be the end of the video. Ultimately, I guess the story does change in a way. Like, part 3's fight, like, the fights between 3 and 4 change a lot. 5 has a few changes depending if Kakyoin does stay. Like, unlike, if he does what Koichi did and just leave, then nothing really everything mostly goes the same. But if he actually stays, then that's kind of an interesting case scenario. And then for 6, that's also kind of interesting. Like, Josuke being there is very unique because he doesn't have the time stop ability. But he does have a good enough ability that could be useful. Like, I do feel like Josuke may actually be able to heal the team up from their injuries. So I guess when Jolene does get stabbed, And with the knife, before he dies, Josuke could realistically heal her, maybe even heal Hermes. So maybe in a way, Jolene could actually survive the parts, but still get hit by the universe reset with Emporio. That would change the story in some ways. So having Josuke and Jolene, like having Emporio and Jolene both live, could change the story a lot. Maybe Hermes and Anasui could live. I don't know. I don't feel like they could. The team could have actually stopped Pucci. Those four only couldn't stop Pucci. I mean, they maybe could prevent the universe from resetting, but I feel like there would need to be a sacrifice for that to happen. So Emporio could use the weather disc, or Jolene could use the weather disc. I feel like it'd probably be Anasui to die, so the weather disc could be used. Maybe Hermes dies for it. But that's the end of this little what if. I hope you enjoyed, because this was a very unique kind of topic. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.